Welcome to another episode of Business by the Numbers. I'm your host, Hunt Emrys, CPA with Parmelis and Associates. So this week we got a special one, and it's the first of a three-part series here going over the benchmark report. We'll talk in a little bit about what this benchmark report is, but the idea of what we're going to cover in the next 3 weeks is shops, you're probably in this, at least some of you guys listening, but these are your peers. These are the kind of sales that they're doing. These are the kind of sales per technician, per location, for Euro shops, diesel shops in the Southeast, Northeast. We have a unique perspective of seeing shops and numbers from all throughout the country, and this report shares it with you, and hopefully it's helpful. So if you want to follow along on this, the idea that we're going to kind of cover for the next couple weeks here is going through the report, which you can download in the link to this episode. Before we get into that, I just wanted to stop and say thank you to you and the rest of the dedicated listeners. Remember, if you would like your question answered on here, if you would like to be a guest, or if you have an idea for a future episode, please shoot me an email at podcast@parmelis.com. Also, we cannot forget our dedicated sponsors, NapaTrax and Promotive, for being such loyal supporters of the show. If you guys want to support the people to support us, give NapaTrax a call, give Promotive a call. I am sure that they can help you out just like they have many other listeners already. So like I said in the introduction, you don't necessarily have to have these numbers up, but this is all kind of going down through. I mean, the overall idea here is one to kind of go into these numbers and explain of what jumped out at me. Now, should you do this instead? No, honestly, I think that if you have not looked at the benchmark report yet, it might be a good idea to just stop this episode and go check it out. But, if you have not checked it out, this first episode is probably a good one that you could go and then look at it afterwards. There's so much information in here. There's stuff that jumps out at me that is stuff that I'm interested in, but from an operational perspective of, a shop owner, general manager, even an advisor, probably some different things to look at to say, hey, you know what, maybe we're better than the average there, or could improve a couple places. I'm kind of following down through this and just kind of reading this real time with you guys, but, well, I shouldn't say reading this real time with you guys. I've spent hundreds of hours on this one and the one we did last year, but just want to kind of go down through and give you guys some tips and things that jumped out at me. So wanted to stop a little bit and talk about the actual benchmark report. So this is our second year that we've done this benchmark report. We've been in business over 30 years. We've had these numbers, we've had this data, and for the longest time, we just really didn't know an effective way to be able to put all this data together and put it into a useful tool. When I first started doing this, or, when I talked about doing this, really the big thing that I was curious about is the relationship between profitability and financial aspects and profitability and non-financial aspects, right? Hey, is there a direct relationship between people who own their buildings and people who make more money? Is there a direct relationship between people who use coaching companies and higher profitability or not? Now, just like any sort of data set, you got to be careful here. There is correlation, does not mean that it's causation, right? And we have to be very, very careful on that. So if you go down here and look at it, and we'll use, rent to own as one of those kind of causation or correlation analysis here. So if I was taking a look at someone's financials and they were doing really well and they had a lot of money, do you think by fact that they were doing really well or had a lot of money would make them more or less likely to buy the building that they're in? Obviously more likely, right? So when you look at something like buying a building, I think arguably on that one, you would see that is a trailing indicator. Hey, shop owners that have done well were able to buy their real estate compared to something like, hey, by buying their real estate, they were able to be a better shop owner. Sometimes it's the case, not necessarily everything. Like I kind of alluded to in the start, though, we're breaking this down into a couple different sections. Now, for this week, we're just going to kind of go into the introduction, some of the key numbers, and then some of the comparisons from 23 to 22. But then in the coming weeks, we're going to go into different location, different sizes, right? Hey, is a shop that does $4 million very similar to a shop that does $800,000? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. Another thing that is often asked of us is type of shop, right? To compare a general repair shop in the Southeast to a BMW Porsche only shop in the Northwest, yeah, there is some comparisons, but in the same flip side, there's a lot that's probably not apples to apples. So chopping it down to size, location, and ideally type of the shop, really you're getting your true peers there versus some very blurry averages. And obviously, we want to see what the top shops are doing. And some of this stuff is, hey, what are the top shops doing? And again, some of that is correlation, not causation. But then there is some commonalities that a lot of the top shops are doing. And then unfortunately, on the bottom side of things, there are some commonalities that a lot of the pitfalls to avoid, right? So between the financials and non-financial aspects of this, hopefully it kind of gives you some solace of, hey, you know what? Looks like other people are, complaining about that, struggling with that. Or maybe a wake-up call of, hey, you know what? A lot of people are a lot farther ahead of me, and I didn't think that was possible. So let's get into it and see what we see here. So kind of going into the first one here, this is our snapshots. And so snapshots are probably going to be the most key numbers that are thrown off, right? If you're talking about your shop, these are the snapshots that you're probably going to tell to your coach, right? Average monthly sales, average sales per technician, gross profit, ARO, and then we got a whole wall of numbers here. So when I'm taking a look at this, average sales, so average of this study was around $150,000. That's kind of, I would say, our wheelhouse of our client base on it. That averages to be about $1.8 million. The median is probably lower than that. I would say our median shop size is right around $100,000, $120,000 a month, but there's some big ones in here that really will kind of skew that average sales side. As a point of fact on that, now, is there some outliers in here? Some shops that are, marching to the beat of their own drum? Sure. We have shops of all different shapes and sizes. And I thought that aspect was actually extremely important to put in here because there is outliers, good or bad, but that's the industry. Now, there was some stuff, some people's businesses that didn't match up, that, things were removed or not included in here. But these are true numbers. Every single year, I have someone that emails me and says, hey, those numbers aren't right. Doesn't mean the numbers of your shop, doesn't mean that they're numbers of your shop or shops in your area. But yeah, these are real numbers, real shops, real people. So overall sales is, like I said, I'm not sure that that's something that if I'm a shop owner, I'm looking at and being like, oh, wow, that's really comparable to me. What was comparable to me, though, is sales per technician. So sales per technician was averaging $32,000, and that's obviously going to be on a monthly basis. If that's an annual basis, you probably got some trouble. So what that's saying is shops in this study are averaging right around $384,000 worth of sales per technicians. So if you're sitting here right now saying, hey, I got 2 technicians doing $800,000, yay, that's probably right where you want to be. Now, where that wake-up call comes in is if you got 4 technicians out there barely cracking 800,000 and they're yelling at you, boss, we need another guy. Because the numbers here, based on other shops of how they're operating, do not dictate it. Does that mean that's what's going to happen in your shop, what needs to happen? Maybe, maybe not. But again, just some information here for you to use as you please. So going down into the kind of key areas of the business, which is really overall gross profit. So I have a joke, and some of my clients have probably heard this, and I always say, if you do labor and parts well, you can screw up everything else. There is an aspect of that's true, right? If you get parts and labor correct, if you make enough gross profit on those, you can really screw everything else up. Now, is that they are the most important things in your business? Well, absolutely. They're also kind of the only things in your business. If you really strip down an auto repair shop, that's what this is. You're selling parts and labor. Sure, you got shop supplies, sublet, tires, and a number of other things, but this is the core business. So when we look at overall labor gross profit on here, we're averaging right around 58, 59%. Which means if you have a $100 labor sale, average shop is keeping $58.50 of that $100. The other, $41.50 is going to technicians and stuff like that. Now, the parts cost side of thing, or the parts gross profit, average shop in this study was just over 45% on parts. Now, when we take a look at shops, that's where, I would say the types of shops are going to come into here really for both of those numbers. There's less of a dispersion on labor gross profit depending on the type of the shop. Even though more specialized shop, we generally will see higher labor gross profit. But the same flip side, right? Some of my highline shops where they're very specialized, working on, Lamborghinis, Rolls Royce, stuff like that, they make their money on labor generally, especially from a percentage standpoint. Really, that comes from two aspects. One of which is the availability of parts. The Euro shops, specialty shops, exotic highline shops. If you're looking at a brake rotor, there might be one brake rotor. It might be a Bentley brake rotor. There's no aftermarket. There's nothing. And again, if you're comparing that brake rotor to a Honda Civic, you could be looking at, 10 times the cost, 100 times the cost, a lot more. I remember my client was telling me last year that he was doing it on a Wraith or a Phantom, and one of the rotors alone was $2,500. Now, someone's going to butcher and be like, that's not the right one. I don't remember what it was. It was super expensive. Now, the reason I bring that up is let's say that we have, 4 rotors for a Honda Civic. That's probably $250 cost. If you buy really, really nice ones, it's not too bad to mark it up to $500, right? Get your 50% gross profit. Now, let's say that you have that one brake rotor for that Bentley or that Rolls Royce. $2,500, 50% gross profit on that would be $5,000, right? Because 50% is doubling the cost. That's going to be hard to do. It's going to be impossible, right? All these guys, I see your numbers, I see these highline shops. You just can't make as much money from a percentage standpoint. However, dollars and cents, even if you're making 20% on that Bentley brake rotor, that's still a ton more than that Honda Civic. But to cut to the point on this one is everyone, before you go and jump out work on the highline stuff, the money is in the Corollas, in the Camrys. We'll see here when we get to the different types of this. Generally, a general repair shop is going to have a higher profit margin than exotics, Europeans, imports, specialties, and then God forbid you get into race prep and stuff like that. The more fun it looks, the less money there is in it usually. So speaking of money, now making money, making a profit is not the end all be all. We talk about a lot. This is a lot of people's main focus, but I get it. Money and profit is not everything for every business. It does not mean that every single shop in this benchmark was maximized for profit, but one of the return on investment numbers is very popular to be able to look at and analyze. So when we look at this study, the average owner pay plus profit percentage is just under 15%, 14.6. So what that means is for every $100 that comes into business, just under $15 ended up in the owner's pocket, either by form of payroll and profit. Now, the reason why we include payroll and profit is so that we don't have any sort of variability based on how much you pay yourself, right? Let's say that you own your shop and you pay yourself $250,000, and then I only pay myself $20,000. Everything else being equal, my shop is going to look a lot better from a profit standpoint, even though we might have made the same amount of money. You just took the money out on payroll. So when we look at this stuff, I don't care if it's on payroll, I don't care if it's in bottom line profit. All the sales that come through the door, how much of that ends up in my pocket. This, to me, personally, is my favorite number. This is how we grade a top shop. Doesn't mean you are the best shop as far as a aesthetic. Doesn't mean the best shop as far as technical skills. When we talk about top versus not, we're just talking about paying profit, right? We're accountants. What else are we going to talk about here? And lastly, on this page, we want to talk about average repair order. And this number really doesn't probably have any bearing on anything because this is including Euro shops, diesel shops, heavy duty shops, everything. But that number was around 675. Where I said some of these numbers are really not useful, maybe in your day-to-day type thinking, the reason that we do this, or one of the other reasons that we do this, is it is an overall snapshot of the industry. So one of the biggest things that we're kind of comparing here with all of these numbers is how some of these numbers compare to 2022. Right? We're talking in 2024. So the first year we did with all of our clients 2022 figures. This one is 2023. And then next year you get the point. I'm not sure what I was hoping for here. I think I was, to a certain extent, hoping that there were some big differences so that there was some stuff to talk about. Really, overall, from what I saw here, I didn't really see any major changes, but hey, this is what the shops are doing. Now, Flash forward to today, and I know we're not doing a 2024 benchmark here with 2024 numbers. I would say the end of 23 and into 24, things have started to slow down, but overall average sales are up. What are we up here? We're up about 4 or 5% overall average sales. Productivity seems to be staying pretty steady there. Overall gross profit dollars, very similar. Labor gross profit slightly fell, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. Parts gross profit similar, gross profit overall like within 0.2 points for you guys. So pretty much from a front line or top line revenue standpoint, we saw a little bit of an increase, and arguably that's just inflation, right? If we're up 3 or 4%, that's probably just you guys increasing your labor rates and the parts houses increasing the price of parts, right? Everything's getting slightly more expensive, so we saw a slight bump on that. Now, the reason why I can kind of tell that it was more of a pricing thing is some of the average monthly sales per service supervisor per bay, things like that, kind of went up the same amount too, which said, hey, we're not really getting more people. We're just kind of doing the same amount for slightly more money. Now, the reason here is kind of tricky that we saw labor gross profit fall. So one of the metrics that we are looking at here is productivity. Right. And so it's the very bottom number on this, and productivity from last year, this year is actually exactly the same. It's overall unchanged on here. So if sales are up and overall productivity is the same, but our gross profit is down, well, then how is that possible? Well, if the guys are doing the same amount of hours, then that means that they were probably, billing out the same amount of hours, right? Which is where I was arguing, all right, the only increase in sales we have is increasing our labor rate. Now, our employees probably want raises as well. And that's the big thing that we saw. Between people kind of, getting a little bit more expensive on payroll, we'd also seen guys putting 20, 15, 30% year to year growth. And so, increasing your tech cost by 10% was nothing. But when your sales only go up and your gross profit is pretty flat otherwise on it, then yeah, even kind of marginal bumps of technician cost are seeing that come down. Also, what I'm seeing here is, let's say that you have a 3-bay shop. You got 3 guys in there, been in there 5 years. If you lose one of your people and you have to go replace them, not only is it a very tough job market right now, but you're probably going to be paying that guy 20% more than the guy that left. It's just today's climate. It's just how it is. And then a lot of times what we've seen on this, that's kind of a domino effect is, all right, replace that guy, get a new guy in here. This guy is 20% more expensive. I didn't know, but apparently I'm underpaying my team. So I can't have my guys that are in here right now find out that they're underpaid. So I need to make sure that they're making market value. And so kind of overnight, you kill your gross profit or decrease it because your sales are going to be the same and you just increased your rate of technician cost. Now, going down through here as far as some of our overhead stuff, not a whole lot of change here. Average shop is still spending around 3% of their sales on advertising. Now, 3% of your sales on advertising, should that be a target? I don't know. I mean, you would talk to your advertiser on that one. Generally, from what I've seen, is we have a tale of 2 shops. We have one shop that spends virtually nothing on advertising. You've been around forever. People know where you are, know how to get a hold of you, know what you do. And then the other half of our clients are trying to grow or newer businesses, and they're spending around 6% of their sales. So average comes in right in the middle there. Education, average shopper spending around 1% on education. So that actually did come down. We had 1.1% in 2022, 0.9% in 2023. If you do the math on it, sales went up, costs stayed relatively similar. So that's why the percentage dropped a little bit. Rent is going up. We saw 4.8% of sales go into our rent cost. Even with increasing sales, rent is getting more expensive. Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about it. Inflation, while it's been slowing down, it has still been inflating, which is why we see overall total expenses. So average shop this year, or 2023, was spending 35% of their sales to their overhead. So if you have $100,000 in sales, $35,000 is going to go to advertising, utilities, rent, insurance. You get it. Up slightly from last year, but again, yeah, things are getting more expensive. So overall expenses are up. Overall profit is actually down slightly. So owner pay is around 6.6%. Again, neither here nor there, really. It could be high, could be low, but we just look at it. Average profit after owner's pay, after everything last year for the shops in 2022 was right around 10%. For 2023, average shop was at 8%. So from a gross profit side, we had a similar year, right? Almost identical. Gross profit was pretty identical across the board. Sales did go up, but some of your cost of goods sold crept up as well. So came in and said, all right, I'm about treading water here. But like I said, inflation, it's always going to be here. If you have a flatline sales, you're going to lose money, or you're going to make less money than the year before because your advertising is more expensive, your insurance is more expensive, your utilities, Amazon, uniforms, office supplies, you name it, right? And so while it wasn't a major change, yeah, it was a small erosion. Now, to kind of say, well, hun, I don't care. This is 2%, right? This is spitting in the bucket. So if we're looking at our average shop here, we're doing $150,000 a month, which is $1.8 million a year. And so if you're saying, well, hun, why would I care about 2%, right? It's not a whole lot of money. It's $36,000. It's $36,000 a year. It's around $3,000 a month. It's around $750 a week. Yeah, I get it, right? You know, there's a lot of money coming around, and sometimes it's easy to kind of say, you know what, I'm not going to sweat the small stuff. But if you're doing $150,000 a year, I might argue with you, hey, don't sweat the small stuff on that. You're doing $150,000 a month. This is exactly what you need to be sweating. The difference is in the details here. Most of these shops, we're not seeing 10, 15, 20% swings in one direction or the other. This is 2 or 3 points up, 2 or 3 points down. But, you know, that's where you go from a good shop to a great shop, or a great shop to a good shop to an okay shop. You get the point there. So we got average repair order, pretty similar. It was actually down a little bit last year to this year. Not enough that I would say that you could have anything. I mean, I have my own personal viewpoints on it. Car count was actually up. We saw that, I think, across the board, honestly, here is people kind of being a little bit less money in their pocket, you know, less government money coming in there. And so maybe taking a couple more cars to get the same amount of revenue. Average amount of technicians per service advisor. So that actually dropped slightly on there. So what we're averaging right now is 2.5 technicians per service advisor, meaning if you have, 2 service advisors, you probably have 5 technicians, because you can't really have a half a technician. Generally what we see, again, most people aren't cutting technicians in half. Split right down the middle. Some people run 2 techs for every 1 advisor. Some people run 3, or some sort of mixture in between. Now, going from 2.55 down to 2.4, again, doesn't seem like a lot, but it's going in a weirder direction. Now, that means that either people are losing technicians, so they're keeping their advisors the same and they maybe lost a person or 2, or maybe some people are ramping up, and I have seen this firsthand. A lot of people came into 2023 ramping up for, you know, hitting the next step in sales. I need another person on the counter, and then realized, hey, we maybe didn't need that person on the counter. Maybe you changed your mind and let that person go, but for a little bit there, still had them. So we got labor rate on here. So average labor rate, 2022, 151. Average labor rate, 2023, 163. And then there's another one that is labor rate divided by labor gross profit. It's kind of a weird one, but it's kind of factoring in your labor rate, but also how profitable those dollars are. But again, it's moving in the same direction, up about 10 points or so. And then, like I said, productivity exactly the same at 57%. Now, before we kind of wrap it up on these last page here of the non-financial stuff, I want to talk quickly on productivity. So this productivity number on here, 57%, that does not mean that these guys were flagging 57% of their hours. It actually has nothing to do with flag rate, because flag rates are very subjective. What this is your total labor sales divided by your labor rate. Because what we're working into is, I don't really care how many labor hours you sold if you're selling them for $1, right? That's not a true labor dollar hour sold. How many hours did you sell at your street rate, right? So you say, all right, I sold 3,000 hours at my street rate. All right. How many technicians did you have? Well, all right, I had 2 technicians. So you divide that out and say, all right, based on this, 3,000 hours of labor hours sold, 2 technicians work around 4,000 hours a year. I'm at 75% productivity, right? That number is always going to be less than what NapaTrack says, because NapaTrack is going to include stuff that, hey, I just pay my guy an hour for that DVI. We don't get paid for it. So my exercise would not count as an hour sold, while NapaTrack's would. So take a look at that number. When I look at my clients' books, that's what I use. Hey, what's your street rate? Divide your labor sales by that amount. Because again, yeah, it's cool to see different hours at different rates, but more or less, if we're not getting paid and we're not getting paid our street rate, I don't care about the hours sold. So look at those, compare it, see where you stand, and yeah, would love to hear your thoughts on any of that stuff. So wrap it up here. We got some of the non-financial stuff, and then next week we're going to get into some of the strengths and weaknesses and top versus not. And then lastly, in 2 weeks, we're going to wrap it up with some of the different data sets based on location and type of shops and stuff like that. So we asked a couple questions on here, and this is a big one. So I'm going to stop right here and say this very slowly, because this is one I want input on. What would you guys like to see for the non-financial data? So the financial data, we get all off of your financials. The non-financial stuff is we're doing surveys. We're asking people's questions. So if you guys want to see something on here and we haven't been measuring in the past, shoot it over. We'd love to kind of get your input on what people would like to see. But what we found on here is kind of the big ones that we usually get asked about. Are people doing DVIs or not? 85% are saying yes. I would have thought that would have been more. I thought almost everyone was doing them now, but I guess not. What shop management software are you using? So TechMetric came in first place there. 41% of the study was using TechMetric. Mitchell, a close second at 21%. Protractor, then we got Shopper, R-Writer, NapaTrack's on there, and then all other ones making up 6%. So there is a ton. I always tell people of the top, the top 3 make up 75% of this. And then there's probably 40 other ones to make up the other 25%. So use what you like. And yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest thing there is it shows there is not a consensus on what everyone likes. What might be good for shop down the street might not be good for you. Do you offer health insurance? So 80% of the clients said that they do offer health insurance. Now, that number was the same for retirement. So 80% of our shops are doing a full retirement benefits packages. So pretty cool. And honestly, this number has been going up. If you were to look at this number, 5, 8 years ago, we're like at the kind of peak of Obamacare, it was probably flipped. Like 20% of our clients were offering health insurance. Think about your own business. Were you offering health insurance in 2012? Probably not, right? And even cooler on here is 80% of the clients are offering health insurance and retirement. And the average is you guys are covering 71% of the cost. So really, if you look at 71%, most of my clients, if you're all for health insurance, they'll at least pay for half. And then it looks like half of you guys are paying for the full amount, which is really cool to see. This benefit side of stuff, right? This coaching stuff, how you pay your technicians, pay plans, this is how you guys have been really setting yourself apart in finding help. How much they get paid and what they're working on from the input I've been hearing from you guys hasn't really been making the difference in landing those top talent. It's offering a full benefits package like some of the big guys do and really paying for some of that stuff because people will leave for health insurance. It's a real fact and we see it happening. So lastly on here, before we get into pay plan, 75% of shops are in some sort of coaching group, mastermind group, 20 group or something like that. Now here's the cool one. And I tell people this all the time. What is your tech pay plan? We have them all across the board because I know that you guys said, well, you have to be flat rate or else you can't make any money. Or flat rate's the devil. You had to pay hourly or salary. We got 40% salary, 38% flat rate, 22% some sort of mixture commission-based stuff for technicians. There's no consensus, guys. And these change all the time. And we'll talk about the top versus not next week, but there's no correlation there either. So If flat rate's working for you, don't listen to someone else and tell you got to change it. If it's not, then hey, couldn't be worse, right? And lastly on here, 51% of our service advisors are paid on commission. The other 49% are salary or hourly, right? So really on the service advisor stuff, the salary or hourly people, most of those guys still probably have some little spiff or bonus package on it. But yeah, I mean, advisors generally 60, 80% base pay, and then maybe 20 to 40% commission. So I hope this was helpful for you. I hope this was maybe a reminder to check out the benchmark. Like I said, if you check out the show notes on here, you'll see the link there. All I ask is if you enjoy it, please share it. If you want to share it with your tribe, if you want to share it with your 20 group, if you want to share it with your team, I'm happy. Do what you want. Share it with people. It's always kind of funny. I appreciate you guys do reach out and say, hey, do you mind if I share this with whoever else? No, I love it. I mean, I like this stuff. Obviously, you can hear my voice. I get interested. But I'm even more excited to give it to you guys and hear, wow, this is pretty cool. I've wondered about some of these things and wasn't able to see it. So yeah, share away, guys. So thanks again for joining me on Business by the Numbers. As always, if you have any questions about the benchmark or anything else, want to be a guest or have an idea for an upcoming episode, shoot me an email at podcast@parmelis.com. Thanks for joining me on the Aftermarket Radio Network. You can find all shows on the aftermarketradionetwork.com and on your favorite podcast listening apps. So thanks again for joining me on Business by the Numbers this week. Stay safe, and I will talk to you guys next week with part 2.